On October 2nd, 2017, one of Britain's best-known holiday airlines disappeared, leaving thousands of passengers stranded abroad, future bookings cancelled, and the government scrambling to build a temporary airline overnight. Every single Monarch flight was cancelled in an instant. Airlines were grounded across multiple bases. Crews showed up for shifts that no longer existed. The Civil Aviation Authority would spend the next 2 weeks operating something close to a shadow airline in its place. The operation required around 700 flights over 14 days, with up to 35 aircraft running simultaneously, coordinated across 27 different carriers and more than 40 airports, all to bring 110,000 people home. At the time, it was the United Kingdom's largest ever airline failure. For nearly 5 decades since Monarch's founding, in the late 1960s, British leisure travel had accepted a comforting truth. Holiday airlines, the friendly carriers that flew families to Mediterranean sun, were a permanent feature of the national landscape. They were practically heritage. Geography always wins, or so the industry believed. Monarch wasn't some obscure microcarrier teetering on irrelevance. At collapse, it operated around 35 aircraft, served 43 destinations, and employed approximately 2,300 people. This wasn't a failing startup. This was a recognizable mid-sized airline that had been part of British holidays for almost 50 years. Yet, every legacy charter operator in Europe was watching its final months with quiet concern. So, how could a recognizable national brand vanish overnight? To understand why Monarch is no longer in the sky, we need to understand why this airline was considered untouchable for so long. The British package holiday market has been one of the most predictable systems in commercial aviation. Tour operators sold bundled holidays. Charter airlines filled aircraft with holidaymakers. Flights, hotels, and transfers all moved together. Saturday rotations flew families to Spain, Portugal, Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, Egypt, and the Canary Islands. The aircraft were full because the tour operator had already sold the seats. The risk sat with the holiday company. The airline simply flew the routes. Monarch fit perfectly into this ecosystem. It operated from London Luton, London Gatwick, Manchester, Birmingham, and Leeds Bradford. It didn't need to be Ryanair. It didn't need to be British Airways. It needed to fly British holidaymakers to the Mediterranean reliably. And it did. The physics of the business were forgiving. Charter contracts guaranteed demand. Tour operators absorbed seasonality. Brand loyalty came from travel agents, not from passengers comparing fares online. Aircraft that flew sunseekers in summer could still find charter work in winter. The trade-offs seem permanent. Geography, distance, and the British appetite for guaranteed sunshine created a stable demand pattern. The model worked for decades. Then, the internet arrived. Then, in the 2000s, low-cost carriers rewrote the rules. EasyJet and Ryanair made it normal to book a flight separately from accommodation. Passengers could now compare prices across dozens of carriers instantly. The bundled holiday wasn't dead, but it was no longer the only option. A British family could fly to Alicante on Ryanair for £30 and book an apartment on a separate website for £200. The travel agent, the tour operator, and the charter airline were suddenly optional. Monarch tried to adapt. It pivoted away from pure charter operations and moved toward a scheduled leisure model, selling seats directly to consumers. On paper, this looked sensible. The future was clearly online, direct, and price-driven. But scheduled flights is brutally exposed. If demand weakens, the airline carries the risk. If competitors cut fares, the airline has to match them. If fuel, currency, or airport costs rise, the airline cannot always pass that on to passengers searching purely on price. A charter airline with contracted tour operator demand has protection. A scheduled low-cost airline needs huge scale and very low costs to survive. Monarch surrendered the old protection without fully gaining the new low-cost advantage. What Monarch entered was one of the most punishing competitive environments in global aviation. Ryanair operated a brutally efficient low-cost machine with approximately hundreds of Boeing 737 aircraft. Its scale, identical fleets, dense seating, secondary airports, and ancillary revenue model were unmatched. EasyJet operated hundreds of Airbus A320 aircraft from strong major airport positions, with a powerful brand and a healthy mix of business and leisure travel. Monarch had 35 aircraft. Analysis of the summer of 2017 revealed that Monarch faced direct competition on the majority of its routes. Once passengers searched purely on price on aggregator websites, nostalgia did not matter. Monarch could not drive its unit costs low enough to match Ryanair. It did not have the major network strength of EasyJet. But the most dangerous competitor was a different beast entirely. Jet2 had quietly built the model Monarch wanted to become. Jet2 understood the UK leisure customer intimately. It built strong bases at regional northern airports. It invested heavily in package holidays through Jet2 Holidays. It offered low fares, friendly service, and reliable operations. By 2017, Jet2 operated approximately 90 aircraft with a clear, coherent strategy. It was not trying to out-cheap Ryanair, it was selling trusted British holidays to families willing to pay a small premium for reliability. In many ways, Jet2 had become what Monarch was supposed to be, a trusted British leisure airline with a strong holiday arm. The difference was that Jet2 had momentum, scale, and integrated package margins. Monarch had heritage and increasingly thin margins on seat-only sales. At the other end of the spectrum sat TUI and Thomas Cook. These were vertically integrated giants that controlled the entire holiday chain. Travel agencies, flights, hotels, transfers, and excursions. If flight prices collapsed, they recouped margin elsewhere. Monarch, increasingly reliant on seat-only sales, had no such safety net. This is the central strategic point. Monarch had become a middle-market airline in a market that was polarizing, not as low-cost as Ryanair, not as networked as EasyJet, not as package-strong as Jet2, not as vertically integrated as TUI, not premium or long-haul like British Airways. Then came the external shocks that exposed how fragile the middle had become. Monarch's network relied heavily on routes to Egypt, Tunisia, and Turkey. These destinations had been profitable staples of the British holiday market for years. A series of terror attacks and political instability changed everything. Sharm el-Sheikh became unsellable after the 2015 incident. Tunisia closed for British tourism after the Sousse attack. Turkey faced repeated security crises and a coup attempt in 2016. British holidaymakers did not stop traveling. They simply shifted towards safe sun destinations: Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and the Canary Islands. But every other airline shifted capacity there too. Overcapacity in the Western Mediterranean drove fares down hard. Monarch did not just lose passengers because people stopped going on holiday. It lost money because everyone started chasing the same safer destinations on the same routes. Cheap fares are great for passengers, they are brutal for airlines without scale. Monarch was neither big enough nor low-cost enough to win a fare war on the Costa del Sol. Then, in June 2016, the Brexit referendum landed another blow. Sterling weakened. Airlines are uniquely exposed to foreign currency. Fuel is dollar-linked. Aircraft leases are dollar-linked. Maintenance, spare parts, and many airport-related costs are denominated in dollars or euros. Monarch earned the vast majority of its revenue in pounds from British holiday makers, but many of its largest costs were in stronger currencies. The math became impossible. A business-heavy airline might pass costs onto corporate travelers. A leisure airline selling cheap flights to Malaga simply could not. Passengers searching aggregators would not pay an extra £40 because the pound had weakened. The squeeze hit from both sides. the passenger felt poorer, the airline's costs rose, margins evaporated. Then, Grey Bull Capital acquired 90% of Monarch, injecting approximately £50 million with access to £125 million in liquidity. The plan was to restructure aggressively, cut costs, and reposition Monarch as a low-cost scheduled leisure carrier. Long-haul operations were dropped, charter work was scaled back, the fleet was rationalized, and in 2014, Monarch placed a bold order for 30 Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft, with options for 15 more. The 737 MAX order was supposed to be Monarch's rebirth, a modern, efficient, single-aisle fleet that could finally compete on unit costs against Ryanair and EasyJet. The order also meant a massive fleet transition. Monarch had operated Airbus narrowbodies in its later years. Moving to Boeing meant new training, new maintenance systems, new simulators, new engineering processes, new spares inventory. For a healthy airline, this is manageable. For a fragile airline, it adds execution risk on top of everything else. The aircraft never arrived. Monarch collapsed before a single 737 MAX was ever delivered. In October 2016, Monarch nearly collapsed for the first time. Grey Bull publicly announced a £165 million capital injection to renew the airline's ATOL license. The industry was told the owners had doubled down. Investigations following the eventual collapse revealed this was a half-truth. The vast majority of that £165 million did not come from Grey Bull, it came from Boeing. Boeing injected over £100 million into Monarch's offshore holding company, Petrol Jersey Limited. The advance was tied to the future sale and leaseback value of the 30 unbuilt 737 MAX aircraft Monarch had ordered. A sale and leaseback is essentially when an airline sells an aircraft it owns or has on order to a leasing company, then leases the aircraft back. Think of it like selling your house to a bank for cash and continuing to live in it by paying rent. Boeing was effectively advancing Monarch cash against the future value of planes that did not yet exist. The maneuver instantly provided the liquidity Monarch needed to satisfy the CAA's strict ATOL requirements. Without it, the airline would have collapsed in 2016. With it, Monarch got one more year. You see, Monarch's situation by 2017 was strategically irrational. The airline was trying to transition fleets, pivot business models, fight a fare war, absorb currency shocks, and replace lost destinations all simultaneously. Each daily route in scheduled leisure flying requires aircraft, crews, slots, marketing spend, and competitive fare matching. With 35 aircraft against Ryanair's and EasyJet's hundreds, Monarch could not amortize fixed costs across enough operations. A larger carrier might lose money on a Malaga route in October and recoup it on Tenerife in February. Monarch's seasonal leisure network had no such balancing routes. The aircraft that made money flying families to Spain in August still needed to earn money in January. They could not. This seems irrational. Airlines typically optimize for utilization and resilience, but Monarch was attempting a turnaround in the most competitive short-haul market in the world, while exposed to almost every shock simultaneously. The brutal logic was strategic, not operational. Monarch was caught between worlds, between charter and scheduled, between packages and seat-only flights, between legacy costs and low-cost fares, between nostalgic brand recognition and modern price-driven competition, between Airbus past and Boeing future. The middle is a graveyard in aviation. Every successful airline has a clear reason to exist. Ryanair is the cheapest, EasyJet has the biggest short-haul network and the best major airport positions from the UK, TUI sells the whole holiday, Jet2 owns the regional UK leisure package, British Airways owns long-haul premium. By 2017, Monarch's reason to exist had become unclear. It was large enough for its collapse to be a national crisis, but not large enough to win the low-cost war. By September 2017, Monarch's cash reserves were projected to drop. The CAA, recognizing that no turnaround was credible, refused to renew the ATOL license. Buyers were explored. None materialized. The aircraft were leased rather than owned. So there were limited assets to acquire. The routes were contested. The brand nostalgic but not decisive. And the 737 MAX commitments complex. Airlines often look valuable from the outside until you realize how little is genuinely defensible. In the final days, the small signs of collapse appeared. The airline deliberately kept flying through October 1st to give the CAA time to ready the repatriation. On October 2nd, the announcement came: Monarch was finished. What followed was the largest peacetime repatriation in British history. The state effectively had to build a temporary airline overnight. The CAA chartered more than 60 aircraft from 24 different operators: Air Transat, Arkia, EasyJet, ELAL, Highfly, Omni Air, Qatar Airways, others. Over 2 weeks, this patchwork armada operated around 700 flights across 40 airports. At its peak, 35 aircraft were flying simultaneously under CAA coordination. The ground operation required 267 coaches to transport 13,000 passengers between airports. Call centers handled 39,000 inquiries in the first days alone. Around 98% arrived back in the UK on the exact day they were originally scheduled to return. The cost to the British taxpayer was estimated at more than £50 million. Monarch's final act was not flown by Monarch at all. It was flown by a patchwork airline, assembled overnight by the British state. Around 2,000 employees lost their jobs that morning. Pilots, cabin crew, engineers, operations staff, head office teams, and holiday staff often learned of the collapse via email or news bulletins. At roughly the same time as the public, Monarch Aircraft Engineering Limited, the group's maintenance arm, initially survived as a standalone operation. It had genuine third-party capability and serviced clients including Virgin Atlantic and Boeing. But the airline's collapse poisoned customer confidence. Major contracts were cancelled. Legacy debts proved unsustainable. On January 4, 2019, MAEL itself collapsed into administration, costing further jobs at Luton and Birmingham. The Monarch ecosystem was finally gone. Most legacy charter airlines could not replicate Monarch's transition attempt successfully. Almost exactly 2 years later, Thomas Cook collapsed in spectacularly similar fashion, crippled by £1.7 billion in debt and the same fundamental shift away from bundled holidays. The Thomas Cook collapse required the repatriation of 150,000 stranded passengers. The total exposure to the ATOL fund reached approximately £481 million, with an estimated £156 million direct bill to the British taxpayer. Yet every operator now understood what Monarch had demonstrated. The traditional charter model was finished. The integrated package model required massive scale to survive. The pure, low-cost model required brutal efficiency. The middle-market leisure airline had no defensible position. The assumption that brand heritage and a recognizable name could carry a British holiday airline through structural change was no longer absolute. The collapse also forced legislative change. Because UK airlines lose their air operator certificates the moment they enter administration, planes legally cannot keep flying to bring passengers home. The government commissioned the Airline Insolvency Review, published in May 2019, which recommended a special administration regime, allowing defunct airlines to keep aircraft in the air temporarily for repatriation. In the summer of 2023, the Monarch name briefly returned. An entity claiming to be Monarch Airlines Limited announced a relaunch, promising 15 Airbus A320s and a return to British skies as a premium leisure carrier. The CAA confirmed it had received no application for an operating license. Nothing happened, and within weeks it all became quiet. In 1968, Monarch was founded because there was an opportunity. British families wanted Mediterranean sun, and a charter airline could fly them there reliably. The route to success was simple and structurally sound. 5 decades later, the collapse represents the complete opposite. Not an airline killed by a single shock, but an airline that could not find a new reason to exist in a market that had moved on without it. When the final Monarch flight landed in the early hours of October 2nd, 2017, it ended a journey that had taken 50 years to unravel. Monarch became proof that sometimes the most significant failures in aviation don't come from a single catastrophe. Sometimes they come from being squeezed gradually from every direction at once, until there is simply no defensible position left. Hey, before you go, the YouTube algorithm thinks you're going to like this video next, so why not check it out?